The small bell above the door chimed softly as Ethan Carter stepped into the general store he had owned for the past 15 years. But today his steps were slow and cautious, like those of a stranger, not the proud owner he once was. His heart pounded beneath the faded hoodie he had carefully chosen from the back of his closet, a stark contrast to his usual crisp button-downs and tailored slacks. A worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes hid the worry and suspicion that clouded his gaze. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans and fresh produce still lingered in the air. Once a comforting aroma, it now made his chest tighten. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide storefront windows, casting long shadows across the polished tile floor. At first glance, everything looked the same: neatly arranged shelves, a few early customers pushing carts, wheels squeaking softly against the newly cleaned floor. But Ethan knew better. Appearances could be the best disguise. The night before, he had spent hours hunched over his desk, eyes burning as he pored over spreadsheets and stacks of receipts. The numbers didn't lie. Sales remained steady, even slightly up. But profits were vanishing like ice cream melting on hot pavement. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it was draining the life out of the business he had poured his youth and faith into. "Sales look fine, Mr. Carter," his manager had told him the day before, wearing a concerned expression that seemed just a little too rehearsed. "Maybe it's just the economy. Everyone's feeling the pinch these days." But Ethan wasn't the kind of man who accepted convenient excuses. He had built this place from the ground up, starting with nothing but a single shelf of essentials in a space barely larger than a storage closet. Over the years, through persistence and an unwavering commitment to his community, he had turned it into a thriving neighborhood hub. Or at least, that's what it used to be. Now, as he stood quietly between the familiar aisles, Ethan felt more like a ghost than a business owner. Every step echoed with memories: late-night inventory checks, bustling holidays, the satisfaction of stocking a shelf just right for a customer. But today, pride had been replaced by a slow, creeping sorrow. In the distance, he saw Sarah, the longtime cashier who had worked with him for 5 years, training a new hire at the register. Her voice carried steadily as she explained the point-of-sale system. Mike, another trusted employee, was restocking the cereal aisle, chatting casually with customers. Familiar faces, people he had trusted like family. He had attended their kids' birthdays, sent graduation gifts. Now he had to wonder, was one of them stabbing him in the back? The feeling of betrayal settled over him like a cold fog. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about the family he thought he had built within these walls. Ethan moved closer to the checkout area, pretending to browse the magazines while keeping a watchful eye on his staff. He watched their expressions, their gestures, their small talk. Everything looked normal. Too normal, and that was what scared him. If someone was stealing, they had learned to hide it well. A young mother passed by with a full shopping cart, her toddler babbling happily in the front seat. Ethan stepped aside, avoiding eye contact. It was Mrs. Thompson, a regular who always came in on Tuesday mornings. Would she recognize him like this? His heart raced, but she walked past without a second glance. A wave of isolation and disorientation washed over him. He had once been greeted by name, the center of this small world. Today, he was just another shadow. Maybe the only one aware that a storm was about to hit. The familiar beep of scanners and the rustling of plastic bags filled the air as the morning crowd began to grow. This everyday rhythm, the soundtrack of routine and reliability, now felt strange. Ethan remained still, eyes on the magazine, ears tuned, not to the usual banter, but to anything off. Any crack in the harmony, any whisper of deceit. His employees used to praise him for his laid-back management style, for how much he trusted them. "You're not like other bosses, Mr. Carter," They say gratefully, "You treat us like family." But now, those words sliced through him like knives. Maybe that trust had been his biggest mistake. Under the pale glow of the fluorescent lights, Ethan turned another page, his eyes pretending to read while his heart hammered in his chest. Everything around him looked ordinary, far too ordinary, and after years in business he knew the real danger wasn't in the chaos. It was in the details, in the little things most people overlooked. He was about to move on when a conversation near the register froze him in place. A chill ran down his spine. Time seemed to pause. Slowly, without drawing attention, he edged closer to the checkout counter, positioning himself near the candy rack. Through the narrow gap between snack displays, he saw a familiar sight. Mike, in his wrinkled red uniform vest, leaning over the register to greet a customer. Not just any customer. Danny Martinez, someone Ethan had noticed always came during Mike's shifts. At first, everything seemed fine. Danny unloaded his cart, premium coffee beans, organic meats, and top-tier household products, the store's highest margin items. Mike scanned them smoothly, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Then it happened. Barely noticeable. Mike's fingers danced across the touch screen, and the total briefly flashed before flickering away. "That'll be $785.00, Mike said with a grin. But Ethan had seen it. Just before it disappeared, the screen had shown a total well over $120.00. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real, a deliberate manipulation, right there in broad daylight, within the very walls he'd once called home. Danny pulled out his wallet, a smug grin playing on his lips like they were sharing an inside joke. "These prices are inflation-proof, man. That's why I keep coming back." The words stung like a slap to the face. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. The trust he had so carefully built, stone by stone, was crumbling. Part of him still didn't want to believe it, but the part of him that had spent nights studying those spreadsheets, that part knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system. He stood there, the magazine crumpling in his clenched fist, the pages now wrinkled and torn. Through the gap he looked not at Mike, but at the betrayal growing in his own chest. And he knew nothing about this was going to be simple anymore. "You're a lifesaver, Mike," Danny laughed, clapping him on the back. "We take care of our own," Mike replied, voice low but clear enough in the stillness of the morning. Ethan remained motionless, pretending to examine the gum aisle, though his ears burned. The special rate's always there for the right people. Old man Carter's too busy counting his cash in the back to notice. That line, so casual, so dismissive, hit Ethan harder than the theft itself. Mike didn't just steal, he mocked him. And after everything Ethan had done for him, like giving him a personal loan last year when his mother needed emergency surgery, that mockery cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Danny leaned in again, voice lowered. "My sister's moving next week. Gonna need to stock her pantry. Think you can hook her up too?" Mike glanced around, his eyes passing right over Ethan's disguised form. "Tell her to come during my shift. Tuesday or Thursday mornings. Cameras in aisle 3 have been glitching lately, if you know what I mean." He tapped his nose, smirking. Ethan's heart sank. This wasn't petty theft. This was an operation, a system, a network, and he had been blind to it for far too long. Ethan remembered. Yes, the camera in that aisle had indeed been reported as malfunctioning, but the maintenance request had mysteriously disappeared. Now he understood why. Everything had been calculated. As Danny walked away from the register with a cart loaded with goods for only a fraction of their actual value, Ethan pretended to examine a pack of peppermint gum, though his mind was in turmoil. How many other familiar faces had received these friends-only discounts? How long had this been going on? how much money had silently drained from the business he had poured his heart and soul into. An elderly woman stepped up to the register. Ethan didn't recognize her. Suddenly, Mike switched back into professional mode. His posture stiffened, his tone polite, each scan of the items precise and without deviation. The total matched perfectly, the receipt printed without a single error. That's when Ethan realized. They weren't scamming everyone. They were selective. They maintained the illusion of legitimacy, like seasoned actors performing on a stage, keeping the audience blissfully unaware they were being played. Then another familiar face appeared. Lisa Chin, owner of the coffee shop just 3 blocks down. Her basket was filled with high-end baking ingredients. Ethan watched as the same pattern unfolded, the swift fingers tapping the touchscreen, the knowing glance, the surprisingly low total. "You're the best, Mike," Lisa said with a bright smile. "Other places charge way too much. I wouldn't be able to keep my cafe open without your help." "Just keep bringing us those amazing pastries," Mike replied with a wink. "And hey, keep it quiet, all right? The boss never checks the system anyway." This time, Ethan felt torn apart inside. He had believed that trust would inspire loyalty, that if he treated his employees like family, they would protect the store as if it were their own. But now he saw the bitter truth. Not everyone cherishes kindness. Some people exploit it. When a new customer approached and pulled Mike's attention away, Ethan quietly moved from that section. He headed toward the other registers, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. He needed to know. Was this just about Mike, or had the cancer spread throughout the entire store? He didn't have to wait long. At each register he spotted the same pattern. There were slight variations, but the core was the same. Selective discounts, altered totals, exchanged glances, and special smiles. The morning sunlight no longer felt warm. It was harsh, exposing every hidden corner of the store. And the truth. Ethan watched the laughter and greetings that once made him proud. Now they felt like a mask, concealing something far more sinister underneath. His fists clenched. He wanted to pull out his phone and check the transaction logs right then, but he restrained himself. Any unusual activity might tip them off, and Ethan knew. This battle required clarity, not rash emotion. He had never felt so alone, and yet never so certain. He couldn't step back, he couldn't look away, and above all, he couldn't let this store collapse at the hands of the very people he had trusted the most. Ethan knew he couldn't react impulsively. He needed to see more, to understand the full scale of this betrayal before taking action. But with every passing minute, every word he overheard, it felt like another drop of strength was being drained from him. The store's intercom crackled to life with the usual morning announcements, a routine Ethan himself had established to make the store feel warm and welcoming. Now the sound only reminded him that he had stood in one place for too long. He moved away from the registers, his steps heavy, his thoughts spinning with questions and dread. He was just about to turn down the coffee aisle when a conversation caught his ear, one that instantly made everything he'd seen so far feel like a mere prologue to the real shock. The store was now entering the morning rush. Ethan stood silently by the coffee shelves, pretending to examine bags of ground beans, but his eyes never stopped scanning. With years of retail experience under his belt, he could spot anomalies easily. And today, every special transaction felt like another blade carving away at the trust he had once placed in this place. Julie, a night shift employee, arrived early, clutching her purse tightly as she made her way toward the break room. But then she paused at Mike's register. Ethan watched as a small piece of paper was discreetly passed from Mike to Julie. His brow furrowed. Were they tracking these special transactions, splitting the profits? Before he could analyze further, another blow hit, and this one didn't come from a stranger. "Sarah," She stepped out of the break room, coffee cup in hand, her ponytail swinging slightly. The sight of her was familiar, comforting even. She had helped Ethan design the store's inventory system, stayed late many nights to fine-tune its operations. But now, as she leaned casually on Mike's counter, everything about her felt foreign. "Busy morning, huh?" she said, her tone light, almost playful. From Ethan's vantage point, he could see her face clearly, the same friendly expression she wore when talking business with him each day. Mike nodded, wrapping up a transaction. "Same crowd. Mrs. Peterson got her special price on that bulk order of organic coffee." Sarah chuckled. That laugh, once so familiar, hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "Space them out," she advised. "Too many overrides in a row, and the system flags it." Her voice dropped, but in the morning quiet, every word landed like a hammer. "Be subtle, Mike. Last thing we need is Ethan finding out. He trusts us too much." Hearing his own name spoken in that tone, that cold, dismissive tone, Ethan felt as if a piece of his soul had been discarded. Sarah, whom he'd treated like a younger sister, whom he had trusted completely, now saw his trust as a weakness to be exploited. His hand clenched involuntarily, the skin on his knuckles pale, the joints rigid with strain. It wasn't just anger coursing through him. It was heartbreak. The pain of being betrayed by the very people he had considered family. But the shock didn't stop there. Tom, the stockroom employee, walked up and joined the conversation. "Speaking of the boss," he joked, "he actually tried reviewing the camera footage last week." Sarah shrugged, her face unnervingly calm. "Don't worry, I accidentally deleted the backup files during system maintenance," she smirked. "Told him it was a glitch. He's too trusting to question it." In that moment, all the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The strange system errors, the missing video footage, the unresolved maintenance tickets, none of it was accidental. It was a carefully crafted plan, executed by the very people Ethan had once called teammates. He froze. The emotions inside him were no longer just rage or sadness. It was the hollow ache of a father realizing the very child he raised was tearing apart the family. This store wasn't just a business. It was his dream, forged through sacrifice, built on the trust of generations of loyal customers. And now, that dream was being trampled by the very people he had loved most. "Hey, Sarah," a young voice called out, interrupting Ethan's racing thoughts. It was Jake, the new hire, barely 19, still wide-eyed and innocent, untouched by the rough edges of the world. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask," Jake said, voice hesitant but curious. "Some of my friends heard there's a special discount. They were wondering if they could get it too." Ethan held his breath. That moment stretched like an eternity. How would they respond to such a naive question? Would they pull another person into their dark web? Sarah paused. Her expression shifted from friendly to serious, not angry but calculating and in control. She leaned in slightly, glancing quickly around before responding, her voice dropping in pitch. "Jake, this isn't something we talk about in public, but since you asked, swing by after your shift. I'll show you some customer service techniques." The implication was crystal clear, and the flicker of a smile on Jake's face told Ethan he got it. A new seed of corruption had just been planted, and now this wasn't just about employee theft anymore. It was a virus, spreading rapidly through the very organization Ethan had once considered family. Julie returned from the break room, holding a thick clipboard filled with inventory reports. "Sarah, I need your signature on the damage reports from yesterday. Had a few items to write off," she said casually. Sarah took the form without even glancing at it. "Make sure the numbers match the report. No discrepancies in the system. We don't need trouble." Ethan stood frozen. Damaged goods? He knew inventory damage reports had spiked unusually in recent weeks. Now it was obvious they were using false damage claims to cover the discounted items they were skimming off the system. Each sheet of paper, every data entry was a layer of disguise masking a sophisticated theft operation. And the way they handled it, so smooth, so casual, meant this was no fluke. It had been planned. It had been running for a long time. A wave of nausea rose in Ethan's chest, like the world was tilting beneath him. Every step he took now revealed another layer of painful truth. From his hidden vantage point, Ethan began noticing something else. The way other employees behaved around Sarah, Mike, and Julie. Some avoided eye contact, slipping past quickly like they wanted to disappear. Others exchanged knowing looks, discreet nods. Whether complicit or not, they all knew. And there it was, a fully functional shadow structure operating beneath the surface of his own business, a parallel power system with its own rules. People Ethan had once called his team, sent birthday wishes to, hand-delivered holiday gift baskets to, were now running a covert machine inside the very walls he had built with care. This morning's sunlight no longer symbolized hope. It was a spotlight, harsh and revealing. Every friendly smile, every cheerful greeting now demanded a second look. How much of it had ever been real, and how much was just a mask? The pressure bore down on Ethan's shoulders, making his hoodie feel like a lead coat. But he couldn't let emotion take over. He couldn't act out of anger. He needed to see this through to the end, track the betrayal to its deepest roots before making a move. The store continued to fill. More staff arrived, and Ethan realized something chilling. Most of them were either directly involved or willingly silent. No one had reported anything. No one had spoken up, because they were all either benefiting, or too afraid, or too indifferent. He slowly made his way to the pet supply aisle, one of the quietest corners of the store. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. Ethan quietly pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen lit up, showing the icon for the management app software he had invested in a year ago to monitor inventory, transactions, and employee performance. Back then, it had been Sarah's recommendation. She had persuaded him with logic and trustworthiness. Now, Ethan's finger hovered above the app icon, and his mind reeled. The very system he believed would help him manage better might actually be the tool they were using to manipulate him, subtly, invisibly. With trembling fingers but steady resolve, Ethan logged into the store's management system, the platform he had once proudly called the second brain of the business. He had poured thousands of dollars into it to optimize operations, reduce labor, and increase accuracy, but now it might just be the key to exposing the people he had once trusted most. As the dashboard loaded, the first red flag appeared, and it hit him like a cold slap. A high number of price override transactions showed up repeatedly during Mike, Sarah, and their inner circle's shifts. Ethan didn't have to dig deep. The pattern emerged clearly, like ink spreading on white paper. These transactions weren't glitches or innocent mistakes. They were deliberate, recurring, and coordinated. His fingers swiped through invoice after invoice. Premium coffee, normally listed at $22.99, was marked up to $115.50, only to be discounted back down as if it were a random deal. Organic meat packages, usually sold for nearly $450.00, were listed as sold for just $28.00. High-exempt cleaning supplies were discounted by up to 40%, despite no promotions being active at the time. Some receipts showed items being scanned, voided, and re-entered at much lower prices, a subtle but unmistakable tactic to avoid triggering system alerts. But what shocked Ethan most was the sophistication behind it all. No fixed discount pattern. The markdowns varied just enough to fool any anomaly detection algorithm built into the software. Clearly someone with in-depth knowledge of the security layers, had designed this operation from the inside. Switching to the inventory module, Ethan felt a chill run through his veins. Bestseller items like coffee, meat, and household products showed strange behavior. Unit sales remained high, but revenue didn't match. Some discounts didn't even show up on receipts. They were disguised as system errors, or written off as spoilage and transit loss. Right then, a new notification popped up. 24 units of premium coffee had just been marked as damaged. The timestamp? Just a few minutes ago. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had just watched those same units being sold. There wasn't a single damaged bag among them. He dove deeper into the historical data, and layer after layer of truth peeled away. Every month, right around high sales days, core inventory items would be written off as spoiled. Dozens at a time, the shrinkage reports meant to track real losses had been weaponized to hide organized theft. Ethan pulled up the year-to-date financial summary, and the numbers hit like a punch to the chest. The store wasn't just leaking money, it was bleeding. Severely. Preliminary losses were already over $50,000, 0 cents. But factoring in creative bookkeeping and unrecorded discounts, the actual number might be double. Coffee, his signature category, had seen a 40% drop in profit margins despite stable sales volume. The meat department was even worse. These weren't mistakes. These weren't laziness. This was organized crime. Ethan clenched his jaw, scrolling to the bottom line. And then he saw the final confirmation. It all lined up. Tuesdays and Thursdays, the exact days Mike had told Danny were the best times to shop smart. The timing of the overrides, the manipulated receipts, the corrupted footage, it all matched. His security system had been compromised. Not from hackers, not from outsiders. From within. By the very people he once patted on the back, the ones he thanked in year-end speeches, the ones he trusted like family. And the surveillance footage he now needed for his investigation? All corrupted. The critical timeframes blank, labeled as technical errors or signal loss. At first, he had thought it was just an inconvenience. But now, as each of those glitches aligned perfectly with the timing of the thefts, Ethan could no longer pretend it was a coincidence. His phone buzzed, a new email from the system provider, request to reschedule security system updates successfully confirmed. Ethan frowned. He had never submitted that request. When he checked the sender, his heart skipped a beat. It had been sent from Sarah's work account. This wasn't just about isolated incidents of theft. She was actively maintaining the blind spots in the system, calculated zones where nothing was monitored, nothing recorded. Each new detail made one thing clearer. This was no longer just a group of dishonest employees. It was a machine. A covert organization meticulously built for one purpose only: to drain the very business that had sustained them. He switched over to the scheduling module, and the pattern became instantly clear. Mike was always scheduled alongside Julie. Sarah paired consistently with Tom. Their shifts were structured like a perfectly interlinked chain. There was always at least one of them in a critical position: registers, inventory, stock management, or oversight. Even their break times had been cleverly staggered, ensuring that their surveillance net never had gaps. Ethan now realized he had been surrounded from the inside, from within the very scheduling he had once thought was random and well-balanced. A system alert flashed on his screen. Another unusual discount transaction. Happening right now. At Register 3. He looked up, eyes locking onto the register. A large order was being processed. The total dropped by nearly $100, 0 cents, after a few rapid keystrokes. The customer smiled knowingly at the cashier before walking out with bags full of deeply discounted items. Ethan's finger hovered over the alert button. Just one tap and all managers would be notified. The transaction halted, but he stopped. Acting now would only tip them off. They'd cover their tracks, hide the evidence, and the truth would vanish before he could fully uncover it. No, he needed more. He needed undeniable proof, a complete case that no one could deny or escape from. He opened the Notes app on his phone and began documenting everything: timestamps, transaction IDs, employee names, original prices, adjusted totals. Each entry was a dagger carved into his heart. Each line a piece of betrayal, another crack in the wall of trust he had spent a lifetime building. And then came the final, crushing realization. Tomorrow was payday. It was also the day the system performed its regular data cleanup, a process designed to erase old records, freeing up space and improving performance. A feature Sarah herself had once insisted he implement during a software upgrade. Now he understood why. Every month, they were handed a clean slate, a blank canvas to restart their cycle of theft, wiping away the previous month's trail as if it had never existed. If he didn't act now, everything he had painstakingly gathered would vanish into digital oblivion overnight, and the betrayal would continue, undetected, unchecked. His chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of stones. This wasn't about a few discounted items anymore. This was an underground operation, a business within his business. Tomorrow, Ethan knew, he wouldn't just be confronting financial fraud, he would be facing the deepest kind of betrayal. The people who had once called him family had used that very trust as a weapon against him. But this wasn't the time for anger. It was time to prepare. Ethan kept recording, reviewing, saving every piece of evidence. Each action was a silent declaration of war. And then morning came. The sky was clear. Sunlight filtered through the glass as if unaware that a storm was brewing inside. No more faded hoodie. No more baseball cap pulled low. Ethan Carter stepped into his store at exactly 8 a.m., dressed in a sharp business suit, polished leather shoes clicking against the gleaming tile floor. His posture was upright, his steps deliberate, not the walk of a man full of doubt, but of a man ready to take back what was his. Inside, the staff smiled and chatted as usual, unaware that the wave they'd been riding was about to crash down on them. The door opened. The familiar chime rang out, not a welcome tune this time, but a warning bell. Ethan walked in, no longer hidden behind quiet observation. Today he wore the uniform of authority, a neatly pressed shirt, a perfectly knotted tie, and in his hand a thick vanilla folder, not filled with sales reports, but with evidence, with truth, with justice, ready to speak its name. Sarah Hare behind the main register looked up as he entered. Her usual smile flickered, then froze for a split second when her eyes landed on the folder. She quickly composed herself. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said with professional calm. "We weren't expecting you so early today." "Emergency staff meeting," Ethan replied, his voice carrying through the store. "Office, 15 minutes. Mike, Julie, Tom, Jake. Be there." He turned to Sarah, his gaze razor sharp. "You finish up at the register and join us?" He caught the quick glance she shared with Mike. A flicker of unease passed between them. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't yet know how wrong, or that the storm was coming from the very man they thought was too trusting. Once they were all in the office, Ethan laid the folder on the table. One by one he opened its contents, each page another fracture in the foundation of trust they had exploited. They sat around the same table where they had once celebrated birthdays, toasted Christmas, planned store promotions, but today it wasn't a meeting table. It was a courtroom. "I've always believed," Ethan began, his voice steady and low, "that trust is the foundation of a successful business. I used to think if I treated my employees like family, they would be loyal. They would protect this place like their own home." He looked at each face, not with anger, but with the pain of betrayal. "Yesterday I learned the true cost of that trust." He opened a page and slid it across to Mike. "Can someone explain why our premium coffee is being sold at a 40% discount to special customers? Or why those same items are marked as damaged in the inventory system?" Sarah froze as she saw her own employee ID highlighted on the spreadsheet. Julie began shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Tom stared hard at the floor, as if it might offer him an escape. "No one," Ethan continued, his voice sharpening. "Then let me help." He pulled out another stack. Camera malfunction logs, system data wipe schedules, overlapping shifts between the same small group. For months, maybe even longer, a covert operation has been running inside this store. Unauthorized discounts, inventory fraud, shift scheduling to conceal activity, and system wipes before the automated data overwrite. "Jake?" The youngest employee turned pale. "Mr. Carter, Not your turn," Ethan cut him off. His voice was no longer gentle. He stood, placing both hands firmly on the table, his eyes piercing straight through each person in the room. "You didn't just steal from me. You betrayed every principle this store was built on. You betrayed my trust, and the trust of the hundreds of customers who walk through those doors every day." No one spoke. The office was thick with silence, suffocating. Even the usual sounds from the store seemed to fall quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what would come next. Ethan turned to Sarah, the one he had once trusted as his right hand. "You helped me design the security system. Was that to improve efficiency, or to make sure it had just the right flaws for you to exploit?" Her face tightened. She opened her mouth, voice faltering. "That's not what we didn't mean to." Ethan's voice rose, not shouting but powerful enough to shake the air. "Didn't mean to steal. Didn't mean to erase surveillance data. Didn't mean to tear apart the trust I placed in every single one of you." He turned to Mike, whose face was flushed deep red, eyes downcast like he was trying to swallow a volcano. "Do you remember who helped you when your mom needed surgery? This store. Me. I did." There was a pause, and the office for that moment became a courtroom, not one of punishment by force, but of truth, of broken trust. A flicker of defiance lit in Mike's eyes, even as sweat dotted his brow. He tried to keep his cool, but his lips trembled as he spoke. "We were just trying to help people," he muttered, voice low but laced with resistance. "Times are tough, prices are insane, and these big bosses—" Enough. Just one word from Ethan, sharp as a whip. "Don't dress this up as some noble crusade. This isn't about community. It's not kindness. This is betrayal. This is deception. This is theft, with full intent." He picked up another file, locking eyes with Mike. "Or should we talk about the damaged goods that just so happened to end up in the trunk of your car after closing time?" No one answered. Ethan pressed on, laying out each piece of evidence: security footage, shift records, transaction logs, manipulated orders, altered systems. These weren't just numbers. They were fractures in the foundation of trust, irrefutable signs that everything had been rotting from within. And then he placed one last document on the table, a blank police report. Nothing written, but its message was loud and clear. A line had been drawn, a decision had to be made. "So," Ethan said quietly, voice steady as stone, "who wants to start explaining?" No one spoke at first, 5 sets of eyes stared at the empty paper, as if their futures hung suspended above those unwritten lines. Seconds, or maybe centuries, passed in a suffocating silence. This wasn't just about losing a job anymore. This was the moment to choose between redemption or running. And then, the first crack. Jake, the youngest, most inexperienced, lowered his head, tears streaming down his face. "I only did it twice," he choked out. "Sarah showed me, said everyone did it, said it was to help friends." That confession flipped a switch. Julie lowered her head, her fists clenched tightly. "It started small," she admitted, exhaling shakily. "A few discounts for struggling customers, elderly folks, single parents." Then the lines blurred. She turned to Ethan, her eyes red. "I never touched the inventory system, but I knew, and I stayed silent. And that was wrong." Ethan said nothing. He just looked, without judgment, but with the heartbreak of a father watching his children own their mistakes. One by one, confessions came, like bricks crumbling from a cracked wall. But not everyone gave in. Tom, arms crossed, remained cold and silent, his face a mask of indifference, like none of this had anything to do with him. No denial, no remorse. Finally, Sarah, at the center of it all, spoke. The last layer of her professional mask crumbled. "We didn't think it was stealing," she murmured, almost to herself. "They were neighbors, friends, people who couldn't afford food. We just wanted to help." She trailed off, then slowly shook her head. "But we went too far, way too far." Silence returned to the room, but this time it wasn't tense, it was heavy. Soaked in regret, a silent acknowledgement that the damage had already been done. All except Mike. His face burned red, but now his eyes held more than defiance. There was bitterness, long bottled up. "What about you, Mr. Carter?" Mike snapped, voice strained through clenched teeth. "You sit up there counting every penny, while we watch customers empty their last dollar just to eat. You call us thieves? What does that make you, the guy getting rich off the backs of working people?" Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked at Mike. Not with anger, but with sorrow so deep it could drown a man. "You think I don't know hardship," Ethan said softly. "I used to live in a one-room apartment, eating stale bread for weeks to save enough to open my first shop. I haven't forgotten. And I've never made money off anyone's back." He paused, his tone lowered. Not sharp now, but somber. Pained. But no one gets to use hardship as an excuse for betrayal. No one gets to steal someone else's dream just because life feels unfair. He looked around the room, faces once so familiar, now strangers in a storm. He felt something inside him had died, but something else was born in its place, something stronger. The will to rebuild from the ashes of trust. "My profits," Ethan continued, voice calm but resolute, "have always gone back into this community, into your paychecks, into the upgrades you use every day, into the emergency fund that once saved Mike's mother." He placed both hands on the table, his gaze heavy on each of them. "But that's not the point anymore. The point is, you didn't just take money, you stole trust, you turned this store into a playground for deception." He stood tall, turning to his desk where a row of sealed envelopes waited. He picked each one up, like sentencing letters for the souls seated before him. "I've made my decisions," he announced. "They're not up for debate." He walked to Jake first. His tone softened, not out of weakness, but out of fairness. "You're young, and you were led astray," Ethan said, his tone measured but firm. 2 weeks suspension, mandatory ethics training. After that, you'll work under close supervision for 6 months. One more mistake, and it's over. Jake nearly collapsed with relief. His eyes were still red, but he nodded repeatedly. Ethan continued. Julie. His voice sharpened. You knew right from wrong, but you spoke up. 1 month suspension, then a probationary period. You'll also be directly involved in rebuilding our new security protocols. Then came the harder part. Dumb, Mike. His voice dropped like a hammer. Clear out your lockers. Security will escort you off the premises. Your final checks will be mailed after deducting any provable damages. No one objected. The evidence was too overwhelming. They simply lowered their heads. Finally, Ethan turned to Sarah. Between them lay a history built on trust, a bond formed through years of collaboration, a near-blind faith. And now, all that remained was silence. You laid the foundation for this, he said, his voice low, not angry, but broken. You used your knowledge of our systems, your position, to construct a machine built to steal. This is no longer an internal matter. He held up a signed document, a criminal complaint. I'm not just firing you, I'm pressing charges. Sarah froze. Her face went pale. Ethan, please, don't. No, he interrupted, voice now like granite. This is beyond compassion. You'll be hearing from my attorney. As security entered and escorted the dismissed employees out of the room, Ethan turned back to the remaining staff, the ones who had stayed silent, still standing at a crossroads. Starting tomorrow, he announced, loud and clear, we're launching a new system. Every transaction will be recorded and reviewed. Random audits will be standard. Cameras will be upgraded. Access to systems will be strictly limited. He paused, scanning each face in the room. But more importantly, we're rebuilding something no machine can monitor: trust. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. Some of you will need to earn it back. Others will need to prove you ever deserved it in the first place. As the room slowly emptied, Ethan remained, standing alone among the papers. Not just evidence anymore, but remnants of a crisis in faith. The evening sun poured through the window, casting a glow over the frame holding the very first dollar he ever earned. That dollar was now a symbol, a relic of simpler days when trust felt like a rare but pure gift. That afternoon, as Ethan walked the aisles of his store, he sensed the shift. There were glances, whispered conversations, a few nervous looks, but there was also relief, as though a storm had passed and the ground was finally drying. In the weeks that followed, the changes took root. The new security system was installed, policies were rewritten, staff training was rolled out, but the biggest transformation wasn't in the hardware or paperwork. It was in the air. The old culture, that false sense of family that had shielded deceit, was stripped away. In its place, a new operational standard, transparent, professional, with boundaries and consequences. Some customers grumbled when their under-the-table discounts vanished. Some never came back, but others nodded, understanding. They knew why Ethan had drawn the line. Profits dipped at first, but then, little by little, the store began to recover, and this time, it was real, no illusions. 6 months later, Ethan stood once again in his office, holding the latest financial report. The numbers finally made sense. Jake, the kid who once slipped up, was now mature and careful. Julie, the one who once stayed silent, had become a leader in implementing new safeguards. The new hires, chosen through stricter screening, fit better, trusted better. Ethan looked out the front windows at a community still living, shopping, greeting one another, and he understood that something inside him had changed forever. His innocence was gone, but in its place was something wiser, a hard-earned truth. Trust, without vigilance, will be exploited, and loyalty, it can't be assumed. It must be built, protected, and nurtured every single day.